Hello, my name is Michaela, and for 2 years now I have taught English as a second language online to students, and over the course of that time I've gotten to hear from many students about what has worked for them, what hasn't worked for them, and then myself, I have studied Spanish in the past. I'm studying French right now, so I've also just kind of figured out what has not worked for me as well. So I'm here to tell you everything that you're doing wrong. Language learning does depend on everyone's needs though, so it's not one size fits all. This is going to be something that may or may not work for you, but this is just from what I've heard from a lot of students and also just what I've noticed in students as well. Also, if you find this video helpful, please like it or comment. I would really appreciate it. Subscribe if you're not subscribed already. I really appreciate all the support and it means the world to me. Thank you so much. Also, if you're learning a language, I do have another video on self-studying a language in general, language tips when you're just learning a language on your own. So I'd recommend also watching that if you want to hear some more tips on language learning. One of the biggest mistakes that I notice is trying to speak too quickly. A lot of people assume that speaking quickly is a sign that they're doing well in the language, so they want to try to speak quickly, which is definitely a good thing. Like, you want to increase your pace eventually, but you shouldn't compromise the quality of your speech and how much you're paying attention to your grammar and vocabulary and everything. Go at a pace that allows you to speak at an optimum proficiency while still challenging yourself with pace. Relying on Duolingo beyond beginner level. I know Duolingo is controversial, and actually any language learning app is controversial as to whether it actually helps you learn or not. I think that for beginners, it's useful because you learn the letters, you learn basic speech and basic words, but after that, keeping a streak is a waste of your time and it sucks you in, like, oh, I need to get my streak every day, and then you convince yourself that you've practiced the language by doing 5 minutes on Duolingo, but it doesn't actually teach you anything. Not repeating after native speakers. One of the best things you can do for yourself is to watch a video or listen to a podcast and then pause it and repeat after native speakers, repeating how they say things, getting those little nuances in the inflection of your voice or the exact sound of the vowel. It's really important to repeat after native speakers. I think a lot of people underestimate the time commitment per week for learning a language. This is one of those things where you can only do what you can, right? Like, if you don't have time to do an hour each day, like, who has time to do an hour each day? Then that's not going to happen. I don't have time to do an hour each day. So if you're not able to put in much time, you have to know and expect that you're not going to see much progress. Comparing your progress to others' progress. Again, everyone's needs are different. No one size fits all. So if you're studying in a class with someone and they're doing a lot better than you, learning it more quickly, don't compare yourself to them. It's just going to hurt your feelings. Not self-monitoring for mistakes. I notice this all the time. As you're speaking, you should constantly be scanning, self-scanning yourself to see, okay, wait, what am I saying? Is this right? Is this wrong? Be the teacher for yourself. If you don't do that, you're just never going to catch your mistakes. So it's very active. With our native language, we don't have to think about that kind of thing. It's just very passive. It just spews out. We don't have to think about whether we're using the right grammar. But when you're learning a language, you really do have to pay attention to that. Relying too much on listening. We romanticize this idea of just listening to podcasts all the time and magically becoming fluent, but that's not how it works. So people will over-rely on listening, and that's just going to harm your ability to speak. Learning a language as though you're preparing for an exam. So granted, there are a lot of language tests. If you're studying for an English certificate, for example, you still don't want to treat it like you're studying for an exam, because then it becomes this goal of, okay, I have to reach this certain level only. I have to master X, Y, and Z. What you want to do is immerse yourself. You want to just be engaging with the language. If you treat it like a test, it puts you into that student mindset where it's like, I need to know only what I need to know, and then I'm going to forget it once the test is over. It's best to not kind of think of it in those terms. Relying only on textbook language and not street language, you really have to expose yourself to what people actually say. So if you're learning out of a textbook, that's great, but then also make sure you're also doing the more street style language as well. And the vice versa is true. Not exposing yourself to different accents. I remember when I was studying Spanish, it was really weird because I didn't even really know exactly how the accents differed. It was just that sometimes I would hear the Chilean accent and all of a sudden I could not understand. It's really important to expose yourself to a variety of accents so that you know the different ways that the language might sound. This one's huge. This next one is so important. A lot of students will watch TV shows in the language that they're learning, which is great, but they watch it with subtitles in their native language. Your brain is going to shut off at that point. Your brain is going to read it in your native language. Your brain is not going to process the audio of the foreign language. You really have to do both the foreign language audio and the foreign language subtitles, preferably with material you already know. So that way, if you misunderstand or you know a lot of the words go over your head, that way you still know what's going on. You have to nip in the bud your repeated mistakes. And I kind of mentioned this before with self-monitoring, but even write down, like, keep a list of all the mistakes that you are repeatedly making. Take note of them, because the amount of times that I've heard students do the same mistakes, it's like, you just need to target those. Underestimating the importance of nuances in grammar. You know, if you really only want to learn the basics of a language, this one isn't as important, but I think a lot of students don't realize how complicated grammar is. I didn't realize how complicated English grammar was until I started teaching it. And then I was like, what? Like, these rules are so weird. They aren't even our rules. They're just these weird things that we follow that have absolutely no rhyme or reason to them. So, yeah, don't underestimate that. Exposing yourself to the same topics. This is one I've noticed with myself, because I'll listen to a lot of French podcasts, and a lot of them talk about language learning, classic French books, foods that people eat in Paris. I listen to them again and again. I feel like I'm practicing, but it's like, wait a second. Wait, I am listening to the same words over and over again, the same topics over and over again. So it's really good to expose yourself to a variety of materials. A lot of students don't find a personal connection to the language. You don't have to have like ancestors or something. You don't have to have that type of personal connection, but you have to feel personal about it in some way. If you're detached from the language you're learning, you're not going to have any incentive to want to learn it. You don't seek out answers to hard concepts. Something that I've noticed with myself, there'll be a really hard point in French, and I know that it's complicated, and I'm tempted to just gloss over it and be like, oh, well, maybe someday I'll just absorb it. But you have to Google it. Like, try to really understand, why is the structure of this sentence the way it is? You rely automatically on ChatGPT, Google Translate. This is another huge one. This is one of the worst things you can do for yourself. Sometimes students will just read answers that they put directly into ChatGPT, and it's like the grammar is perfect, the words are perfect. And it makes sense, is that if you're reading out loud the correct version, that you'll learn. But relying on these automatic translations, that's one of the worst things you can do for yourself, because you're going to teach your brain, oh, you don't need to actually think about this. You can just pop it into Google. Like, your brain will pick up on that. It will know. Not treating your learning like a muscle. You have to treat it like you would working out. And if you don't work out for a couple months, you're going to lose that muscle. Likewise, if you don't practice or touch the language for a couple months, you're going to lose that and you're going to have to relearn it. A lot of students challenge themselves too early. And I know this sounds a little bit harsh to try to be like, no, don't try that hard. But if you challenge yourself too early, you're just gonna, first of all, overwhelm yourself. And second of all, you're going to use a couple fancy words at the expense of not using good sentence structures. Go at the level that you're at. Plateauing. This is another huge one. So students often feel like they've plateaued, and they will feel frustrated. Like, why am I not learning? Why am I not improving? The language learning curve, it definitely is hard, because at a certain point you don't notice your progress anymore. So just don't give up. And that's lame. I know that's corny and campy and terrible advice, but when you feel like you're plateauing, you can't give up. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see students making. Being scared to speak. Many people will confess to me that they're afraid to speak, and that's why they want to practice, and that's awesome. Like, you have to practice to not be afraid to speak. One of the biggest mistakes you can make is not speaking because you're afraid to speak. Putting vocabulary before grammar. Grammar is absolutely the foundation. You could learn all the best vocabulary in your language, and if you don't know the grammar, you're never going to sound very good. Grammar, a lot of people don't like grammar. It's a burden that we must bear, that we first have to deal with the grammar, but a lot of students will use great words, but with the wrong grammar, and you have to make sure to get that grammar first. Neglecting verb tenses and conjugations. For languages like Spanish and French, as I've learned, conjugations are very important, and one of the biggest mistakes people will make is not learning the verb tenses. This means both not learning what is, how does the word change depending on I ran, I run, I will run, I have run, etc. But also just understanding verb tenses in general. Understanding what is the present continuous, what is the past perfect. Understanding these verb tenses will make the studying immensely easier. Watching videos or listening to podcasts that don't interest you. This is a huge mistake you can make, because it goes back to that feeling of a personal connection to your language. You want to feel tied to it, and if you're watching things that bore you, you're not gonna like learning. Not worrying about pronunciation. So I see a lot of people talking about this online, and I think it's one of the biggest mistakes you can make. A lot of people will say you don't need to worry about it because having an accent is a natural thing. I agree. I 100% agree, and it's I'm always going to have an American accent in French, I'm sure. But people conflate having an accent with just getting the pronunciation wrong. And I think people spend less time on pronunciation because they tell themselves, oh, well, I'll never speak like a native speaker anyway, so it's okay for me to pronounce it differently. But you have to still pronounce it right, even if you have an accent. Like saying colonel instead of colonel. That's not about accent, it's about pronunciation. So make sure to not mix those up. Not starting immediately. People put off language learning. They'll say, oh, I'm going to start a month from now when I'm less busy, when this is over, when I'm less stressed. Start now. Start today. Start when you finish this video. At this point, I am wasting your time now that you're done the video almost. So I'm going to end the video here. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that it was really helpful. Again, please like and subscribe if you found it helpful, and have a wonderful rest of your week.